How many of you have ever found yourselves in a situation that seemed perfectly safe, only to discover you had completely misjudged everything? Because standing at the altar in a designer gown that cost more than her yearly salary, Zara Williams was beginning to suspect she had made a terrible miscalculation. The man beside her was devastatingly handsome in his custom Italian suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, olive skin catching the light from the cathedral's stained glass windows. Lorenzo Castellano stood with the kind of confident stillness that commanded attention, his green-gray eyes focused on the priest with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. When he had slipped the platinum band onto her finger moments before, his touch had been gentle but possessive, his gaze holding hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary for a man who supposedly had no romantic interest in women. Which was exactly why she had agreed to this insane arrangement in the first place. 3 weeks earlier, Zara had been working the late shift at Rossetti's, the upscale Italian restaurant where she waited tables to pay for her nursing school loans. She loved the job despite the demanding customers and long hours. The money was decent, the food was incredible, and the owner, Antonio Rossetti, treated his staff like family. It was nearly midnight when she had stepped into the alley behind the restaurant to take out the trash, expecting nothing more eventful than avoiding the stray cat that liked to lurk by the dumpster. Instead, she had witnessed 3 men in expensive suits brutally beating Antonio, while a 4th man watched from beside a black sedan. The sounds had been horrific. Bone against flesh, Antonio's gasps of pain, the casual laughter of his attackers as they demanded to know where he had hidden something they called the ledger. Zara had pressed herself against the brick wall, heart hammering, phone clutched in her trembling hand as she debated calling 911. Before she could move, footsteps had echoed from the mouth of the alley. "You gentlemen seem to be having difficulty with my associate," a voice had said, calm and cultured with the faintest trace of an Italian accent. The voice belonged to Lorenzo Castellano, though she had not known his name then. She had only known that he moved like a predator, his presence immediately shifting the energy in that narrow space. The 4 men had stepped back from Antonio, suddenly uncertain. "Mr. Castellano," the leader had stammered. "We did not know he was under your protection." Lorenzo had smiled, and even hidden in shadow, Zara had felt the chill of it. "Everything in my territory is under my protection," he had replied softly. "I believe you gentlemen are lost." They had left quickly, supporting their limping leader between them. Lorenzo had helped Antonio to his feet with surprising gentleness, checking his injuries with the efficiency of someone accustomed to violence and its aftermath. Zara had remained frozen against the wall, hoping the darkness would hide her, when Lorenzo had turned and looked directly at where she crouched. "You can come out," he had said, his voice losing its edge. "You are safe." She had emerged on unsteady legs, expecting threats or demands for her silence. Instead, Lorenzo had studied her face with those penetrating eyes and asked if she was hurt. When she had shaken her head, still too shocked to speak, he had nodded and pulled out his phone to call what she assumed was a private doctor for Antonio. "You saw nothing here tonight," he had told her before leaving, but it had sounded more like advice than a threat. She had gone home that night thinking it was over, that she had stumbled into something dangerous but escaped unscathed. She had been wrong. 2 days later, Antonio had called her into his office after her shift, his face grim beneath healing bruises. "There is a problem, Zara," he had said heavily. "My attackers, they know you were there. They have been asking questions about the pretty black waitress who works nights." Her blood had turned to ice. "What does that mean?" "It means," Lorenzo Castellano had said from the doorway, making both her and Antonio jump, "that you need protection." She had turned to face him, taking in the expensive suit, the confident bearing, the way Antonio immediately deferred to his presence. In the better lighting of the office, she could see that Lorenzo was perhaps 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of classical features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. He was also, according to restaurant gossip, completely uninterested in women. Everyone knew Lorenzo Castellano was gay. He had never been seen with a woman romantically, had a long-time boyfriend named Marco who occasionally accompanied him to business dinners, and showed no interest in the numerous beautiful women who tried to catch his attention. It was part of what made him seem safer than other powerful men in his position, less likely to expect sexual favors or use his influence inappropriately. which was why his solution had seemed so reasonable. "Marry me," he had said simply. "My wife will be untouchable. The men who want to silence you would not dare harm the spouse of Lorenzo Castellano." The proposal had been presented like a business arrangement, which she supposed it was. A marriage of convenience that would protect her while giving him social cover for whatever his real relationship with Marco entailed. She would live in luxury and safety. He would gain a respectable wife for public appearances, and everyone would benefit. Now, 3 weeks later, standing in the cathedral as Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Zara was beginning to question the wisdom of marrying a man she barely knew, regardless of his supposed sexual orientation. "You may kiss the bride," Father Miguel announced, his voice echoing in the vast space. Lorenzo turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising tenderness. For a moment that stretched longer than it should have, he simply looked at her, his green-gray eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in what should have been a brief, ceremonial kiss. Instead, the kiss lingered. His mouth was warm and firm against hers, moving with a skill and passion that had nothing to do with mere performance. Her lips parted in surprise, and she felt him inhale sharply before he stepped back, his hands dropping to his sides. The look in his eyes was anything but platonic, intense and hungry in a way that made her knees weak. The small gathering of witnesses applauded politely. Lorenzo's mother wept happy tears in the front pew while Marco stood beside her, smiling in a way that seemed oddly knowing. Antonio beamed from his seat, clearly relieved that his favorite waitress was now under the protection of the most powerful man in the city. "Congratulations, Mrs. Castellano," Lorenzo murmured, offering her his arm with old-world courtesy. The ride to his estate passed in relative silence, the luxury sedan gliding through the city streets while Zara tried to process what had just happened to her life. Lorenzo sat beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or businesses he owned, his voice casual and warm. He seemed completely at ease, as if he married virtual strangers on a regular basis. His home was a sprawling Mediterranean villa set behind high walls and electronic gates, all cream-colored stone and red tile roofs overlooking the ocean. The interior was elegantly appointed with antiques and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. Staff members lined up in the foyer to meet her, their faces carefully professional but their eyes bright with curiosity. "This is Mrs. Castellano," Lorenzo announced, his hand settling on the small of her back in a gesture that felt more intimate than it should have. "She is to be treated with the same respect you would show me." "Welcome home, Mrs. Castellano," the elderly housekeeper said warmly. "I am Rosa, and I oversee the household staff. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask." Home. The word felt strange applied to this grand place with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Zara had grown up in a cramped apartment with her single mother, worked her way through community college, and lived in a studio apartment barely large enough for a bed and small kitchen. This felt like stepping into someone else's fairy tale. "Let me show you to your room," Lorenzo said, guiding her up the sweeping staircase. "You must be exhausted." Her room turned out to be a suite larger than her entire previous apartment, decorated in soft blues and creams with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the ocean. A sitting area with comfortable chairs flanked a marble fireplace, while the bedroom featured a king-sized bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. The adjoining bathroom was a masterpiece of marble and gold fixtures, complete with a bathtub large enough for 2 people. "This is beautiful," she said softly, running her fingers over the silk bedding. "It is too much." "Nothing is too much for my wife," Lorenzo replied, that edge of intensity creeping back into his voice. "Dinner will be served at 8. Rosa will show you to the dining room when you are ready." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Zara?" "Yes, you are safe here. Whatever happens, remember that." After he left, Zara sank onto the bed and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was married to one of the most powerful men in the city, living in luxury she had never imagined, protected from the men who wanted to hurt her. It was everything she could have asked for under the circumstances. So why did her new husband's intense gaze and lingering touches make her feel like there was far more to this arrangement than she understood? That evening, She made her way to the dining room wearing a simple black dress she had brought from home, feeling underdressed despite Rose's assurances that she looked lovely. The dining room was another masterpiece of elegant design, dominated by a long table that could have seated 20 people. Tonight, however, only 2 places were set at one end, the setting intimate despite the grand surroundings. Lorenzo was already there, having changed into dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized his olive complexion. He stood as she entered, pulling out her chair with the same courtly manners he had displayed throughout their brief courtship. His fingers brushed her shoulders as he helped her seat, the touch sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "How are you settling in?" he asked, taking his place across from her as Rosa and another staff member served the first course. "It will take some adjustment," Zara admitted, tasting what appeared to be some kind of seafood appetizer that melted on her tongue. "Everything is so grand. I feel like I am playing dress-up in someone else's life." Lorenzo smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "You will adapt. You have more strength than you realize." Dinner proceeded with easy conversation about her nursing studies, his various business interests, and her impressions of the house. He was an attentive host, ensuring her wine glass never emptied and asking thoughtful questions about her goals and dreams. She found herself relaxing despite the surreal circumstances, drawn in by his obvious intelligence and unexpected sense of humor. It was not until the main course arrived that she worked up the courage to address the elephant in the room. "I want to thank you again for doing this," she said carefully. "I know it cannot be easy to disrupt your life for a stranger's safety." Lorenzo set down his fork, studying her face with that penetrating gaze. "What makes you think my life is disrupted?" "Well, you have Marco to consider. This arrangement must be awkward for him." Something flickered in Lorenzo's eyes, gone too quickly for her to interpret. "Marco understands the necessity of the situation. He wants me to be happy. And you think this marriage will make you happy?" "I think," Lorenzo said slowly, his voice dropping to a lower register that made her pulse quicken, "that I am getting exactly what I wanted." The intensity of his stare made her cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate, suddenly aware of the intimate atmosphere Rosa had created with dimmed lights and candles. This felt less like a business dinner and more like a romantic evening, which made no sense given the circumstances. After dessert, Lorenzo walked her back to her room, his hand resting lightly on her lower back in a gesture that was becoming familiar. At her door, he turned to face her, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to lean closer. "Sleep well, Zara," he said softly. "Tomorrow we will discuss the practical aspects of our arrangement." "Good night, Lorenzo." She slipped inside her room and leaned against the closed door, her heart racing for reasons she could not quite name. This was supposed to be safe, a platonic marriage to a man who had no romantic interest in women. So why did every interaction with Lorenzo feel charged with an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with business? It was only when she turned toward the bed that she saw it. Laid out on the silk comforter was a set of lingerie so beautiful and expensive it took her breath away. Midnight blue lace and silk that would complement her dark skin perfectly, designed to entice and seduce. A small card lay beside the delicate garments, written in Lorenzo's distinctive handwriting. "For my beautiful wife. Sweet dreams." Zara stared at the lingerie for a long moment, her mind racing. What kind of gay man bought his pretend wife seductive lingerie? And what kind of business arrangement was she really part of? Standing alone in her luxurious new bedroom, wearing a wedding ring that caught the lamplight like captured stars, Zara began to suspect that she had gotten herself into something far more complicated than a simple marriage of convenience. Zara woke the next morning disoriented by the unfamiliar luxury surrounding her. Silk sheets caressed her skin as she stretched, the scent of ocean air drifting through windows that offered a view she was still not accustomed to seeing. For a moment, she had forgotten where she was, forgotten the surreal turn her life had taken. Then she caught sight of the wedding ring glinting on her finger and remembered. She was Mrs. Lorenzo Castellano now, living in a mansion that felt more like a museum, married to a man who left lingerie in her room despite supposedly having no interest in women. The lingerie still lay folded on her dresser where she had placed it the night before, too confused and overwhelmed to know what to do with it. The message it sent contradicted everything she thought she knew about Lorenzo, but there had to be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps it was a gesture from Rosa, or some kind of traditional wedding gift she did not understand. Gay men could appreciate beautiful things, could want their wives to feel pampered and elegant for public appearances. That had to be it. The smell of coffee and something delicious cooking drew her from her room after she had showered and dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. Following the scent down the marble staircase and through hallways lined with artwork, she found herself in a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. All granite counters and professional appliances, with herbs growing in pots on the windowsill and copper pots hanging from hooks overhead. Lorenzo stood at the stove with his back to her, wearing dark jeans and nothing else, his broad shoulders moving as he stirred something in a pan. His hair was damp from a shower, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and she could see the play of muscles beneath olive skin that spoke of regular physical activity. A thin scar ran along his left shoulder blade, silver against tanned skin, and she found herself wondering how he had gotten it. The sight of him half-dressed and domestic should not have affected her the way it did. He was gay, unavailable, and this was supposed to be a business arrangement. But her body apparently had not received that memo, because heat pooled low in her belly as she watched him move with unconscious grace around the kitchen. "Good morning," she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He turned with a smile that made her pulse skip, reaching for a dish towel to wipe his hands. "Good morning, wife. Did you sleep well?" Eventually, she admitted, though she did not mention the hour she had spent staring at the ceiling thinking about wedding rings and lingerie and the way he had kissed her at the altar. "I thought you might be hungry," Lorenzo said, gesturing to the stove where eggs Benedict sat plated alongside fresh fruit and what looked like homemade pastry. "Rosa does not arrive until 9, and I enjoy cooking when I have the time." "You made all this?" Zara asked, accepting the plate he offered and trying not to notice how his fingers brushed hers during the exchange. "My nana insisted I learn," he said with a fond smile. She claimed no woman would want a man who could not feed her properly. The irony of that statement hit them both at the same time. Lorenzo's expression shifted, something indefinable flickering in his eyes as he seemed to realize what he had said. Zara felt heat creep up her neck, confused by the sudden tension crackling between them. "She is a wise woman," Zara managed, settling onto one of the bar stools and focusing on her breakfast rather than the way Lorenzo's chest moved when he breathed. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked gardens she was eager to explore. Lorenzo had pulled on a white t-shirt that unfortunately did nothing to diminish his appeal, and she found herself stealing glances when she thought he was not looking. This was ridiculous. She had never been the type of woman to get flustered over male beauty, especially when that man was completely unavailable. The doorbell interrupted her internal scolding, followed by Rose's cheerful voice calling out a greeting. Moments later, footsteps approached the kitchen accompanied by a man's voice speaking rapid Italian. "Marco," Lorenzo called out. Switching to English as a tall, dark-haired man appeared in the doorway. "Perfect timing. Come meet my wife." Marco was handsome in a refined way, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested expensive grooming and a good tailor. His eyes were warm brown, intelligent and kind, and when he smiled at Zara, she could see why Lorenzo would be attracted to him. What she could not understand was the speculative way Marco looked between her and Lorenzo, as if he were sizing up some kind of dynamic she was not aware of. "Mrs. Castellano," Marco said, taking her hand and kissing it with old-world charm. "Lorenzo has told me so much about you. You are even lovelier than he described." There was something in his tone that made her glance at Lorenzo, who had gone very still beside the coffee maker. A flush of color had appeared along his cheekbones, and his jaw had tightened in a way that suggested displeasure. "Marco," Lorenzo said carefully, "we discussed this." "Of course," Marco replied, but his eyes were dancing with what looked suspiciously like mischief. "I am simply welcoming your beautiful bride to the family." The interaction felt loaded with subtext she could not decipher. If Marco was Lorenzo's boyfriend, why did he seem so pleased about Lorenzo's marriage? And why did Lorenzo look like he wanted to throttle him? "I should let you two discuss business," Zara said, standing and carrying her plate to the sink. "Thank you for breakfast, Lorenzo. It was delicious. Where are you going?" he asked, moving to intercept her before she could leave the kitchen. I thought I might explore the gardens, if that is all right. Of course. But stay within the walls, and take your phone. If you need anything, Rosa knows how to reach me. His concern was sweet, protective in a way that made her feel cared for rather than controlled. She nodded and headed for the door, catching a fragment of rapid Italian from Marco that made Lorenzo's response sharp with warning. An hour later, she was reading in the library when voices in the hallway announced the arrival of more visitors. Through the partially open door, she could see Lorenzo greeting three men in expensive suits, his demeanor shifting to something more formal and commanding than the relaxed man who had cooked her breakfast. "Gentlemen, welcome," Lorenzo said in English, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen. "I believe you have met my wife." Zara looked up in surprise as he appeared in the doorway, extending his hand to her with a smile that transformed his face. The men behind him were studying her with curiosity that felt more invasive than polite interest. Mrs. Castellano, the oldest of the three, said, stepping forward to shake her hand. "Anthony Torino, congratulations on your recent marriage." "Thank you," Zara replied, acutely aware of Lorenzo's hand settling on her lower back as he guided her forward to meet the others. What followed was perhaps the strangest 10 minutes of her life. The men treated her with a deference that seemed excessive for someone they presumably saw as a beard for their gay associate. They asked about her comfort in the house, her plans for redecorating, whether she had everything she needed. When Lorenzo mentioned her nursing background, they nodded with something that looked like approval, as if her profession gave her additional value. "Your husband is a lucky man," Torino said as they prepared to leave. "It is good to see him so well settled." After they left, Zara found Lorenzo in his study, standing behind a massive desk while he reviewed documents that looked official and potentially intimidating. "That was interesting," she said carefully. He looked up from his paperwork, wariness flickering in his expression. "In what way?" "They seemed very invested in your personal happiness for business associates." Lorenzo set down his pen, giving her his full attention in a way that made her suddenly aware of how alone they were in the room lined with books and dark wood. "They are old friends as well as partners. They worry about me, and they think I am good for you." Something heated flashed in his green-gray eyes before he could bank it. "They think you are exactly what I need." The words hung between them, charged with meaning she was afraid to examine too closely. This conversation felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might crack under her weight at any moment. That evening, as she was reading in the living room, Lorenzo appeared with a cut on his hand wrapped in what looked like a hastily applied paper towel. "What happened?" she asked, immediately shifting into nurse mode as she guided him to sit beside her on the sofa. "Nothing serious," he assured her, though she could see blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. "I had a disagreement with a broken glass in my office." "Let me look at it." She unwrapped his hand carefully, assessing the damage with professional efficiency. The cut was deep but clean, running across his palm just below his fingers. It would need cleaning and proper bandaging, possibly a stitch or two. "Do you have a first aid kit?" she asked, though she was already cataloging what she would need from the medical supplies she had glimpsed in the master bathroom. "Rosa keeps one in the kitchen pantry. Stay here." When she returned with supplies, Lorenzo was watching her with an expression she could not read. She settled beside him again, closer this time, taking his injured hand in both of hers as she cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency. "This might sting a little," she warned, applying antiseptic to the cut. He did not flinch, though she felt his muscles tense under her touch. His hand was larger than hers, calloused in places that spoke of physical work despite his obvious wealth, warm and undeniably masculine. As she worked, she became increasingly aware of his proximity, the way he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You have gentle hands," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. She glanced up to find him watching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. They were close enough that she could see gold flecks in his green eyes, close enough that if she leaned forward just slightly, she could touch her lips to his. "There," she said quickly, securing the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. "That should heal nicely if you keep it clean and dry." "Thank you," he murmured, but he made no move to withdraw his hand from hers. They sat in silence for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, awareness crackling between them like electricity. Zara felt her pulse racing, her skin warming under his intense gaze. This was insane. He was gay, married to her for protection, completely unavailable in every way that mattered. So why did sitting beside him feel like the most dangerous thing she had ever done? The spell was broken by her phone ringing from the coffee table. She pulled back quickly, reaching for it with hands that trembled slightly. "Hey girl." Her friend Keisha's voice was bright with curiosity. "How is married life treating you?" Zara glanced at Lorenzo, who had leaned back against the sofa cushions but was still watching her with those penetrating eyes. "It is fine," she said carefully. "Comfortable." "Comfortable?" Keisha laughed. "That is all you have to say about being married to one of the most powerful men in the city?" "It is not that kind of marriage," Zara reminded her, walking toward the windows for the illusion of privacy. "You know his situation. Right, the gay thing. But still, the man is gorgeous and rich. There could be worse fake marriages." "He has been very kind," Zara said. "I feel safe here." She turned back toward the sofa and found Lorenzo's expression had changed, his jaw clenched and his eyes hard in a way that made her stomach flutter. He looked angry, though she could not imagine why. "Well, I am glad you found a safe harbor," Keisha was saying. "You deserve some peace after everything with James." They talked for a few more minutes about mundane things before hanging up, but when Zara returned to the sofa, Lorenzo's mood had shifted. He was studying his bandaged hand with focused intensity, the easy intimacy of moments before replaced by something darker. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He looked up at her, and for a moment she thought he might say something important, something that would explain the tension that seemed to follow them through every interaction. Instead, he stood and moved toward the door. "I have some calls to make," he said. "Good night, Zara." She watched him leave, confused by the abrupt change in his demeanor. What had she said that upset him? The conversation with Keisha had been innocuous, just normal friend chatter about her new living situation. That night, she woke from a nightmare about the alley behind Rossetti's, about hands grabbing her in the darkness while Antonio's attackers laughed. Her heart was racing, sweat cooling on her skin as she struggled to separate dream from memory. The house was quiet around her, peaceful in a way that should have been comforting but somehow felt too still. Unable to return to sleep, she slipped from her room and padded downstairs in search of warm milk or tea, anything to settle her nerves. The kitchen was dark except for moonlight streaming through windows, silver light that made familiar objects seem strange and otherworldly. She was reaching for a mug when footsteps on marble announced someone else's presence. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway wearing only pajama pants that hung low on his hips, his hair tousled from sleep and his chest bare in the dim light. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, moving toward her with the kind of careful approach one might use with a skittish animal. "Bad dream," she admitted. "I thought some tea might help." Without a word, he moved to the stove and filled a kettle with water, his movements efficient despite the late hour. She watched him work, noting the play of muscle beneath skin, the careful way he held his bandaged hand away from the tasks. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked as they waited for the water to boil. "It was about that night," she said quietly. "The alley. Sometimes I can still hear Antonio's voice when he was begging them to stop." Lorenzo went very still, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I am sorry you had to witness that. You should never have been put in danger. You saved him," she pointed out. "And me, by extension." He turned to face her fully, his green eyes intense in the moonlight. "I would do anything to keep you safe, Zara. Anything at all." The words were spoken with such quiet conviction that they raised goosebumps on her arms. This felt like more than protective concern, more than obligation to his fake wife. It felt personal in a way that made her pulse race. The kettle whistled, breaking the spell between them. Lorenzo prepared her tea with practiced efficiency, adding honey without asking how she liked it, as if he had been paying attention to her preferences. When he handed her the steaming mug, their fingers brushed, and she felt that familiar jolt of awareness that had no business existing between them. "Feel better?" he asked after she had taken a few sips of the perfectly prepared tea. "Much. Thank you." They stood in comfortable silence, she drinking tea while he leaned against the counter watching her with an expression she could not decipher. The kitchen felt intimate in the moonlight, domestic in a way that made her heart ache for things she should not want. "Zara," Lorenzo said suddenly, his voice lower than usual. "Yes?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his bare chest, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb stroking gently across her skin in a gesture that felt reverent. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his accent thicker with whatever emotion was driving him. "So brave and lovely and perfect." Her breath caught as he leaned down, his intention unmistakable in the way his gaze dropped to her lips. This was insane, impossible, but she found herself rising on her toes to meet him halfway, drawn by a pull she could no longer deny. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment like glass breaking. Lorenzo jerked back as if burned, his expression shifting from tender to alert in an instant. He grabbed the phone from the counter, his voice clipped and professional when he answered. "What is it?" A pause, during which his face went hard. "How long ago?" Another pause, longer this time. "Double the perimeter watch and notify me of any changes." When he hung up, Zara could see the careful mask he wore during business sliding into place, hiding the man who had almost kissed her in the moonlight. "Is everything all right?" she asked, though his expression already provided the answer. "You should get some sleep," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." The phone call that had interrupted their almost kiss lingered in the air between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. Whatever Lorenzo had learned during that brief, terse conversation had transformed him from the tender man who had touched her face with reverent fingers back into the controlled, dangerous figure she glimpsed during his business dealings. The shift was so complete it left Zara wondering if she had imagined the heat in his eyes, the way his voice had roughened when he called her beautiful. 3 days passed in a strange dance of proximity and avoidance. Lorenzo was unfailingly polite, solicitous of her comfort, and completely unreachable on any level deeper than surface courtesy. He worked long hours in his study, took mysterious phone calls that sent him pacing through the garden with his jaw clenched, and looked at her as if she were a puzzle he could not quite solve. Which was ironic, because she was beginning to feel the same way about him. On Thursday morning, Rosa approached her in the breakfast room with a suggestion that felt more like a gentle order wrapped in maternal concern. "Mrs. Castellano, you need proper clothes for your new life," Rosa said, refilling Zara's coffee cup with the kind of efficiency that brooked no argument. "Mr. Castellano has arranged for you to visit some suitable shops today." "I have clothes," Zara protested weakly, though she had to admit her wardrobe of scrubs, jeans, and casual dresses felt inadequate in a house where even the staff dressed better than she typically did. "You have a lovely foundation," Rosa agreed diplomatically. "But you are Lorenzo Castellano's wife now. You need pieces that reflect your position." An hour later, Zara found herself seated in the passenger seat of Lorenzo's sleek Mercedes, trying not to stare at the way his hands looked gripping the steering wheel or the sharp line of his profile as he navigated through city traffic. He had dressed carefully for this expedition in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his dark hair styled with casual perfection that suggested expensive grooming. "You do not have to do this," she told him as they pulled up in front of a boutique that looked intimidatingly exclusive. "I am perfectly capable of shopping alone." "I am sure you are," Lorenzo replied, coming around to open her door with the kind of old-world courtesy that made her feel cherished despite herself. "But I want to spend time with my wife." The way he said wife, with that slight emphasis and rough edge to his voice, made warmth pool low in her belly. She was beginning to recognize that tone, the one that suggested things she should not be thinking about a man who was supposedly unavailable. The boutique was everything she had feared it would be. Elegant, intimidating, and staffed by women who took one look at Lorenzo and immediately shifted into the kind of attentive mode reserved for very important clients. They greeted him by name, inquired after his mother's health, and looked at Zara with the calculating assessment of professionals trying to determine how much money they could extract from the shopping expedition. "Mrs. Castellano needs a complete wardrobe," Lorenzo announced without preamble. "Evening wear, casual pieces, business-appropriate items. Everything she might need for any social situation." What followed was perhaps the most surreal 3 hours of Zara's life. She was measured, draped, and paraded in front of mirrors while Lorenzo sat in a leather chair like a sultan holding court, offering opinions that were both discerning and surprisingly intimate. He knew exactly what colors would complement her skin tone, which cuts would flatter her figure, and what styles would make her feel confident rather than uncomfortable. Try the blue one, he suggested when she emerged from the dressing room in a cocktail dress that made her feel like a different person entirely. It is beautiful, but it is too much, she protested, catching sight of the price tag that made her eyes water. Lorenzo stood and moved toward her with the kind of fluid grace that reminded her he was probably dangerous in ways she preferred not to contemplate. The blue dress was silk and definitely too expensive, cut to emphasize her curves while maintaining sophistication. "You are my wife," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that the hovering saleswomen could not hear. "Nothing is too much for you." His hands settled on her waist, ostensibly to adjust the fit of the dress, but the touch felt possessive in a way that made her breath catch. They were standing close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, close enough to catch his scent and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You look incredible," he murmured, his gaze traveling over her face with an intensity that had nothing to do with evaluating clothing. "Thank you," she managed, though her voice sounded breathless even to her own ears. They were interrupted by the approach of a young man who apparently recognized Lorenzo from across the store. Zara watched in fascination as Lorenzo's entire demeanor shifted, his hands dropping from her waist as he turned to face what was clearly an unwelcome intrusion. "Lorenzo Castellano," the man said with the kind of familiarity that suggested they knew each other. "I heard congratulations are in order." "David," Lorenzo replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you. And this must be the lovely bride," David continued, turning his attention to Zara with a smile that felt calculated rather than genuine. "You are even more beautiful than the rumors suggested." Zara felt Lorenzo tense beside her, something dangerous flickering in his expression as David stepped closer than social convention required. She could practically feel possessive energy radiating from her fake husband, though she could not understand why he would care about another man's attention if he truly had no romantic interest in her. "We were just finishing up here," Lorenzo said, his hands settling on her lower back with unmistakable ownership. "Of course," David replied, though his eyes lingered on Zara in a way that made her skin crawl. "Perhaps we will see you both at the charity gala next month." "Perhaps," Lorenzo said in a tone that suggested they definitely would not. After David left, Lorenzo was quiet and brooding, his jaw clenched as he guided her through the rest of their shopping expedition with mechanical efficiency. When they finally loaded bags into the car, Zara could no longer contain her curiosity. "Who was that man?" she asked as Lorenzo started the engine with more force than necessary. "No one important," he replied, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the steering wheel. "He seemed to know you well." David Torino thinks he knows everyone well. He is wrong. The last name registered with recognition. Any relation to Anthony Torino, the man who visited the house? "His son," Lorenzo said grimly. "And someone who needs to learn about appropriate boundaries." Zara studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders and the hard line of his mouth. This looked suspiciously like jealousy, which made absolutely no sense given their arrangement. Unless Lorenzo was not as unavailable as everyone believed. That afternoon, while Lorenzo was locked in his study with Marco and several other serious-looking men, Zara decided to seek answers from the one person who might be willing to provide them. She found Marco in the garden, smoking a cigarette while he paced along the stone paths between rose bushes. "Mrs. Castellano," he said with surprise when she approached. "Is everything all right?" "That is what I was hoping you could tell me," she replied, settling onto a bench and gesturing for him to join her. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For being so understanding about this arrangement. It cannot be easy to watch your boyfriend marry someone else, even for practical reasons." Marco went very still, the cigarette halfway to his lips forgotten as he stared at her with an expression she could not decipher. For a long moment, he said nothing, and she began to wonder if she had overstepped some boundary she did not understand. "My boyfriend," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Lorenzo," she clarified, confused by his reaction. "I know the situation is complicated, but I want you to know that this marriage does not have to change anything between you two. I understand my role here." Marco began to laugh, a sound that started as a chuckle and built to something approaching hysteria. He laughed until tears appeared in his eyes, until he had to sit down on the bench beside her to catch his breath. "Oh, Madonna," He gasped, wiping his eyes. Lorenzo is going to kill me. What is so funny? Zara asked, beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. You think, Marco said, struggling to control his laughter. You think that Lorenzo and I are lovers. Are you not? Marco looked at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from amusement to something that might have been pity. Mrs. Castellano, Zara, he said gently. Lorenzo Castellano is many things. Dangerous, powerful, ruthless when necessary. But he is not gay. He never has been. The words hit her like a physical blow, making her head spin as she tried to process their implications. But everyone says, she began weakly. Everyone says what Lorenzo wants them to say, Marco explained, his voice kind but firm. It has been useful for him to have people believe he has no interest in women. It keeps him safe from certain expectations, certain pressures in his line of work. But you, she said, grasping for understanding. People have seen you together. As friends. As business partners. I am his second-in-command, not his lover. And before you ask, I prefer women as well. I have a girlfriend named Sophia, who you will meet soon. Zara stared at him, her world tilting on its axis, as everything she thought she understood rearranged itself into a completely different picture. Lorenzo was not gay, had never been gay, which meant this marriage was not the safe, platonic arrangement she had agreed to, which meant every heated look, every possessive touch, every moment of tension between them had been exactly what it seemed. Does he know that I believed? She started to ask. That you thought he was gay? Marco's smile was gentle but knowing. I think he figured that out fairly quickly. The question is what you plan to do now that you know the truth. Before she could answer, footsteps on gravel announced someone's approach. They both turned to see Lorenzo walking toward them, his expression darkening as he took in the scene of Marco and Zara deep in conversation. Marco, Lorenzo said, his voice carefully controlled. I need to speak with you. Privately. Of course, Marco replied, standing with the kind of alacrity that suggested he knew he was in trouble. Mrs. Castellano and I were just discussing the garden. Were you? Lorenzo said, his green eyes shifting between them with obvious suspicion. Marco excused himself quickly, leaving Zara alone with her husband who was looking at her like she might bolt at any moment. The silence stretched between them, loaded with everything she now knew and everything she did not know how to say. What did he tell you? Lorenzo asked finally. The truth, Zara replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Something I should have known from the beginning. Lorenzo moved closer, his hands clasped behind his back, as if to keep himself from reaching for her. And how do you feel about the truth? I feel like I need to understand what I really agreed to when I married you. That evening, Lorenzo appeared at her door dressed for dinner in dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized the olive tone of his skin. His hair was damp from a shower, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and when he smiled at her, she felt her traitorous heart skip a beat. I thought we could dine on the terrace tonight, he said, offering her his arm with courtly grace. The weather is perfect. The terrace overlooked the ocean, set with a small table that could seat two comfortably. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, casting dancing shadows across white linens while the sound of waves provided a romantic soundtrack she tried not to notice. Rosa had outdone herself with the meal, each course more delicious than the last, but Zara barely tasted anything. She was too aware of Lorenzo sitting across from her, too conscious of the way candlelight played across his features and made his eyes seem to glow. You are quiet tonight, he observed as they finished the main course. I am trying to process some things, she admitted. Such as? Lorenzo set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, studying her face with that penetrating gaze she was beginning to know well. Such is why you let me believe something that was not true. You believed what you needed to believe to feel safe, he said quietly. I was not going to take that away from you before you were ready. And when would I have been ready? When you trusted me enough to know that I would never hurt you, no matter what I wanted or felt. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Zara felt heat creep up her neck as she met his gaze, seeing desire there that was no longer hidden behind careful masks. What do you want, Lorenzo? She asked softly. You, he said without hesitation, his voice rough with honesty. I have wanted you since the moment I saw you in that alley, brave and terrified and beautiful. I want to protect you and cherish you and make you forget that any man ever made you feel unsafe. And what do you feel? that I am falling in love with my wife, and I have no idea if she could ever feel the same way about me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable in a way she had not expected from a man of his power and control. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she looked at him across the small table, seeing past the dangerous reputation to the man who cooked her breakfast and tended to her nightmares. "Lorenzo," she said softly. "Tell me about him," he said suddenly, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The man who made you afraid." Zara blinked at the change in subject, though she supposed it was not really a change at all. Her past was part of what stood between them, part of what made trust so difficult. "James," she said quietly. "We dated for 2 years. I thought he loved me. What did he do to you?" Lorenzo's hands had clenched into fists on the table, his jaw tight, with barely controlled anger. She had the sudden sense that he was preparing himself to hear something that would require violence, and the realization should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel protected in a way she had never experienced. "He did not hit me," she said quickly, watching some of the tension leave Lorenzo's shoulders. "But he controlled everything. Where I went, who I saw, what I wore. He made me feel like I was never good enough, never smart enough, never worthy of real love." "Where is he now?" Lorenzo asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I do not know. I moved across the country to get away from him. Changed my name, started over. I thought I was safe." "You are safe," Lorenzo said with quiet conviction. "You are under my protection now, and nothing will hurt you. Not James, not the men from the alley, nothing." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I would burn down the world before I let anyone hurt you." The intensity in his voice, the absolute certainty of his protection, should have been overwhelming. Instead, it made her feel cherished in a way that brought tears to her eyes. That night, the nightmares came worse than ever. She woke gasping, sweat cooling on her skin as images from the alley mixed with memories of James's cruel words and controlling hands. The walls of her beautiful room felt like they were closing in, making her feel trapped despite the luxury surrounding her. Without thinking, she slipped from her bed and padded down the hallway toward Lorenzo's room. The house was quiet around her, moonlight streaming through windows to light her way. She paused outside his door, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing? What did she expect from him? Before she could retreat, the door opened to reveal Lorenzo in pajama pants and nothing else, his hair tousled from sleep and concern immediate in his expression. "Zara? What is wrong?" "Bad dreams," she whispered, feeling foolish but unable to turn away. Without a word, he stepped aside to let her enter his room. It was larger than hers, decorated in masculine tones of navy and gold, dominated by a bed that looked like it could sleep 4 people comfortably. She had never been in a man's bedroom under circumstances like these, never felt this strange combination of vulnerability and safety. "Do you want to talk about it?" Lorenzo asked gently, guiding her to sit on the edge of his bed. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Instead, she found herself leaning against his warmth, drawn by the comfort he offered without question or expectation. "Stay with me," she whispered against his chest. "Please." He went very still, his arms coming around her with careful reverence. "Always," he murmured into her hair. "For as long as you need me." She woke the next morning cradled against Lorenzo's chest, her head pillowed on his shoulder while his arms held her securely against his warmth. Sometime during the night, they had shifted so that she was curled against his side, one of her legs tangled with his, her hand resting over his heart. She could feel the steady rhythm beneath her palm, could smell his cologne mixed with something essentially him that made her want to burrow closer. This was dangerous territory, lying in bed with a man who had confessed to wanting her, a man she was beginning to want in return. But she had never felt so safe, so protected, so cherished. For the first time in years, she had slept through the night without fear. "Good morning," Lorenzo murmured, his voice rough with sleep. His hand stroked gently through her hair, and she could feel the tension in his body that suggested he was very aware of their intimate position. "Good morning," she replied, not moving away despite knowing she should. "How do you feel?" "Like I could stay here forever," she thought, but did not say. "Like maybe I am falling in love with my husband, which was never supposed to be part of this arrangement." "Better," she said instead, finally pulling back to meet his gaze. What she saw in his green eyes made her breath catch. Heat and tenderness and carefully controlled desire, all focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like the center of his universe. "Zara," he said softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Before he could say whatever he was thinking, his phone rang from the nightstand. Lorenzo's expression immediately shifted to alert concern as he reached for it, his body tensing as he read the display. "Yes," he answered, his voice clipped with authority. "When? How many? I see." The conversation continued in rapid Italian, but she could read enough in his expression to know it was not good news. When he hung up, Lorenzo's face was grim with the kind of controlled anger that suggested someone was about to regret their choices. "What is it?" she asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "The men who want you silenced," Lorenzo said, reaching for his clothes with efficient movements. "They have been asking questions in the city, offering money for information about Lorenzo Castellano's new wife. We need to leave for Sicily immediately." As she watched him dress with the kind of focused intensity that spoke of real danger, Zara realized that the safe harbor she had found in his arms was about to be tested by forces that wanted her dead. But looking at Lorenzo's face, seeing the deadly determination there as he prepared to protect her, she felt something shift inside her chest. She was no longer just a woman hiding from threats she could not control. She was Lorenzo Castellano's wife, and that meant something more than she had ever imagined. It meant she was under the protection of a man who would burn down the world to keep her safe. And maybe, just maybe, it meant she was falling in love with the most dangerous man she had ever met. The private jet that whisked them away from the city felt like stepping into another world entirely. Lorenzo had arranged everything with the kind of efficiency that spoke of experience with sudden departures, and within 2 hours of that ominous phone call, they were airborne over the Atlantic. Zara pressed her face to the window, watching America disappear beneath clouds while trying to process everything that had changed in the space of a single conversation. She was married to a man who was not gay, had never been gay, who wanted her with an intensity that made her pulse race every time she caught him looking at her. The protective facade he had maintained was crumbling, revealing glimpses of someone passionate and possessive and completely focused on her well-being. It should have terrified her, this realization that she was alone with a powerful man whose reputation was built on danger. Instead, she felt something that might have been anticipation building low in her belly. The villa in Sicily was everything she had imagined when she thought about Mediterranean paradise. Perched on cliffs overlooking water so blue it looked artificial, the cream-colored stone buildings seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Terraced gardens cascaded down toward the sea, filled with olive trees and flowers she could not name, their scents carried on warm breezes that felt like silk against her skin. "This is beautiful," she breathed as Lorenzo guided her through rooms decorated in warm earth tones and natural textures. "It has been in my family for generations," he said, watching her face as she took in the casual elegance around them. "My great-grandfather built it as a retreat from the world." A retreat was exactly what it felt like. Private, isolated, intimate in a way that made her acutely aware of being alone with Lorenzo in paradise. The staff had prepared the villa and departed, leaving them with stocked kitchens and absolute privacy. No business associates, no interruptions, no pretenses to maintain. That afternoon, she discovered the pool area and knew she had found heaven on earth. The infinity pool seemed to merge with the Mediterranean beyond, creating the illusion of swimming in the ocean itself. She had packed quickly, grabbing whatever vacation clothes she owned, and the simple black bikini she slipped into felt modest compared to the designer pieces Lorenzo had bought her. But when she emerged from the villa to find him by the pool, his reaction made her feel like the most beautiful woman alive. Lorenzo had been reading, a book forgotten in his lap as he reclined on a chaise in swim shorts that revealed the full extent of his impressive physique. When he looked up and saw her, his book hit the stone deck with a thud that echoed in the sudden silence. His green eyes darkened as they traveled over her body with undisguised hunger, lingering on the curves emphasized by the simple black fabric. "Cristo," he whispered, his voice rough with barely contained desire. She felt heat bloom under her skin at the intensity of his stare, suddenly aware of every inch of exposed flesh under his appreciative gaze. This was what she had been missing during their careful dance around each other. This was Lorenzo without his protective facade, his want for her written clearly across his handsome features. "Is something wrong?" she asked, though she could see perfectly well that nothing was wrong with his reaction. "You are going to kill me," he said, rising from the chaise with fluid grace that spoke of controlled power. "Do you have any idea how beautiful you are?" She moved toward the pool, hyper-aware of his eyes following her every step. The water was perfect, warm as silk as she slipped in and swam toward the infinity edge. Behind her, she heard Lorenzo dive in with barely a splash, his movements through the water as efficient and controlled as everything else about him. When she turned to face him, he was close enough to touch, water droplets clinging to his olive skin and his dark hair slicked back from his face. They treaded water together in comfortable silence, the Mediterranean sun warm on their shoulders and the villa rising like a dream behind them. "Lorenzo," she said finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "I need to understand something. Ask me anything. Why the pretense? Why let everyone believe you were gay?" He swam closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his green eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body even in the cooling water. "Protection," he said simply. "In my world, families are targets. Wives, children, they become weapons used against you. If everyone believes I have no romantic attachments, no one I love, then no one can threaten what matters most to me. And Marco goes along with this? Marco has been my closest friend since childhood. He understands the necessity of maintaining certain illusions for survival." Zara processed this, floating in the warm water while she tried to wrap her mind around the complexities of his world. It made sense, she supposed, but it also meant that every assumption she had made about their arrangement was completely wrong. "So when you married me," she said carefully, "it was not actually safe for me at all." Lorenzo's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "It was the most dangerous thing I could have done to you. But I could not let them hurt you, and marriage was the only protection I could offer that they would respect. Even knowing the risk, especially knowing the risk, I would rather have you alive and in danger by my side than safe and beyond my reach." The honesty in his voice made her heart skip a beat. This was not the careful politeness of their early interactions or the controlled distance he had maintained while she believed him unavailable. This was raw truth from a man who had dropped every defense. "What does that mean for us?" she asked softly. "It means," Lorenzo said, swimming close enough that his legs brushed hers in the water, "that I have been going slowly insane watching you move through my house, sitting across from you at dinner, lying in my bed knowing you were sleeping down the hall and believing I could never touch you. Why could you never touch me? Because you needed to feel safe. Because you had been hurt by someone you trusted, and I refused to be another man who took advantage of your vulnerability. And now? Now you know the truth about what I am, what I want. The choice is yours to make." She looked at him floating beside her in the infinity pool, this powerful, dangerous man who had turned his world upside down to protect a stranger, who had married her to keep her safe despite the risk to himself. The afternoon sun caught in his dark hair and highlighted the strong lines of his face, and she felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been her heart finally accepting what her body had known all along. "I think I have been lying to myself too," she admitted. "About what?" "About why I felt so safe with you. It was not because I thought you were gay and therefore no threat. It was because something in me recognized that you would never hurt me, regardless of what you wanted." Lorenzo went very still in the water, hope flickering in his expression. "And what do you want, Zara?" "You," she whispered, the word barely audible over the sound of water lapping against stone. "I want my husband to stop pretending he does not desire his wife." The effect of her words was immediate and electric. Lorenzo closed the distance between them with swift strokes, his hands finding her waist underwater as he pulled her against his chest. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart, could see desire and relief and something that might have been love burning in his green eyes. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with restraint. "Once we cross this line, there is no going back to the way things were." "I do not want to go back," she said, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "I want to go forward. With you." That evening, they prepared dinner together in the villa's kitchen, working side by side with an ease that felt natural despite the undercurrent of awareness crackling between them. Lorenzo cooked with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, his movements efficient and sure as he prepared fresh seafood and pasta while she chopped vegetables and tried not to stare at the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt. They ate on the terrace as the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose while candles flickered between them on the small table. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, touching on everything from his childhood in Sicily to her dreams for the future, building the kind of emotional intimacy that made physical desire feel inevitable rather than rushed. "Tell me about your family," she said as they lingered over dessert and the last of the wine. "My mother you have met. She adores you, by the way. My father died when I was 15, and I learned too young what it means to be responsible for protecting the people you love." "Is that why you never married before? To protect them from your world?" "Partly. And partly because I never found someone worth the risk." "Until now?" "Until now," he confirmed, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. As full darkness fell over the terrace, Lorenzo reached across the small table to take her hand, his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. "Walk with me," he said softly. They strolled through the villa's gardens hand in hand, following paths lit by solar lights that made the olive trees look silver against the dark sky. The sound of waves against cliffs provided a romantic soundtrack, while the scent of night-blooming flowers made the air feel intoxicating. When they reached a secluded spot overlooking the sea, Lorenzo stopped and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face with reverent tenderness. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. "What happens between us tonight? It is not just desire. It is not just physical attraction or the result of forced proximity." "What is it?" she whispered. "It is me falling completely in love with my wife and hoping she might feel something similar for her husband." The confession hung between them in the warm night air, honest and vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. She looked up at this man who had risked everything to protect her, who had shown her kindness and patience and passionate desire, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "I do," she breathed. "I feel exactly the same way." Lorenzo's smile was brilliant in the moonlight before he lowered his head and kissed her with all the restraint and careful control he had been maintaining for weeks finally shattered. His mouth moved against hers with hungry demand, tasting and claiming while his hands tangled in her hair. She melted against him, her body coming alive under his touch as months of denied attraction finally found expression. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers while his hands stroked through her hair. "Take me inside," she whispered. "Take me to bed." The master bedroom was softly lit by candles that someone had arranged while they were at dinner, rose petals scattered across silk sheets that looked like something from a fantasy. Lorenzo had planned this, she realized with wonder. Had hoped that tonight would be the night they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, as well as law. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands and mouth worshipping every inch of skin revealed as silk and lace fell away. When she stood naked before him in the candlelight, his eyes darkened with desire so intense it made her knees weak. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his accent thicker with arousal as his hands mapped the curves of her body with trembling reverence. "So perfect. I have dreamed of this moment since the day I first saw you." She reached for him with hands that shook slightly, needing to feel his skin against hers, needing the connection she had been craving since she learned the truth about his desires. When they came together on the silk sheets, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. He took his time with her, patient and thorough and devastatingly skilled, bringing her pleasure with hands and mouth and whispered endearments in Italian that made her feel cherished beyond measure. When he finally claimed her completely, moving within her with controlled power that gradually gave way to passionate abandon, she felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what it meant to be loved. This was not the clinical coupling she had experienced with James, all about his pleasure and her compliance. This was Lorenzo focused entirely on her responses, on building sensation and connection until she shattered in his arms with cries that echoed off the villa walls. Only then did he seek his own release, her name on his lips like a prayer as he collapsed against her with shuddering intensity. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the silk sheets, her head pillowed on his chest while his fingers stroked lazily through her hair. The candles had burned low, casting dancing shadows across walls while the sound of waves provided a peaceful soundtrack to their contentment. "I love you," she whispered against his skin, the words feeling natural and right in the warm darkness. "Ti amo, Anchio," he murmured back, pressing kisses to the top of her head. "I love you too, my beautiful wife." She woke the next morning to find Lorenzo already awake, lying beside her with his head propped on one hand while he watched her sleep. His hair was tousled from her fingers, his green eyes soft with satisfaction and something that looked like wonder. "Good morning, Mrs. Castellano," he said softly, leaning down to brush a gentle kiss across her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Castellano," she replied, stretching luxuriously against the silk sheets and enjoying the way his eyes darkened as the movement revealed the curves of her body. "How do you feel?" "Like everything has changed," she admitted. "Like I am finally married to my husband instead of hiding from him." Lorenzo's smile was brilliant as he gathered her close, rolling them over until she was sprawled across his chest with her hair falling around them like a curtain. "No more hiding," he agreed, his hands mapping the curves of her back with possessive tenderness. "No more pretending. Just you and me and whatever comes next." "What comes next?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. As if summoned by her question, the shrill ring of Lorenzo's phone cut through the peaceful morning. His expression immediately shifted from tender to alert as he reached for the device, his body tensing as he read the display. "Yes," he answered curtly. "How did they find us?" "I see. How long do we have?" The conversation that followed was brief and conducted in rapid Italian, but she could read enough in his face to know their paradise was about to be interrupted by the harsh realities of his world. "What is it?" she asked when he hung up, though his expression already provided most of the answer. "The men hunting you have tracked us here," Lorenzo said grimly, already reaching for his clothes with efficient movements. "They found the flight records, traced the plane. We have perhaps an hour before they arrive." Fear shot through her, cold and sharp after the warm contentment of moments before. But alongside the fear came something else, something that surprised her with its intensity. Anger. These men had taken enough from her already. They had driven her from her home, forced her into hiding, and now they were threatening to destroy the happiness she had finally found. "What do we do?" she asked, reaching for her own clothes with steady hands. "We fight," Lorenzo said simply, checking the weapon he pulled from a hidden drawer. "And we win." Looking at her husband's face, seeing the deadly determination there as he prepared to protect her and their newfound love, Zara felt something fierce and protective rise in her own chest. She was no longer just a victim hiding from threats beyond her control. She was Lorenzo Castellano's wife, and she was ready to fight for what they had found together. The transformation in Lorenzo was immediate and terrifying. One moment he was her tender lover, pressing gentle kisses to her shoulders as they dressed in the aftermath of passion. The next, he was someone else entirely. A predator preparing for war, his movements sharp with deadly purpose as he checked weapons she had not known existed in their paradise retreat. "Stay close to me," he instructed, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Do exactly what I say when I say it. These men will not hesitate to kill you if they get the chance." "How many are there?" Zara asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the fear racing through her veins. "Marco said 4, maybe 5. They arrived by boat and are approaching from the shore path." Lorenzo moved to the bedroom window, peering through curtains with the kind of focused attention that spoke of military training she had never suspected. His face was hard with concentration, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. This was the man whose reputation had made grown men step aside in fear, and she was seeing him unleashed for the first time. "Can we call for help?" she whispered. "No time. Local authorities would take too long to respond, and these men know we are here. Our only option is to eliminate the threat permanently." The word eliminate sent a chill down her spine, but alongside the fear came something else. Determination. These men had hunted her across an ocean, threatened the life she was building with Lorenzo, forced them from their wedding bed to fight for survival. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Lorenzo turned from the window, something like pride flickering in his green eyes as he took in her resolute expression. "Can you shoot?" "I grew up in rural Louisiana. My grandfather taught me to hunt." "Good. Take this, stay behind me, and do not hesitate if you get a clear shot at someone trying to hurt us." The gun felt heavy and familiar in her hands. Muscle memory from childhood afternoons with her grandfather kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. She had never shot at a human being, never imagined she would need to, but looking at Lorenzo's face as he prepared to defend their life together, she knew she would do whatever was necessary. The first shots came through the villa's front windows, glass exploding inward as muzzle flashes lit the early morning darkness. Lorenzo moved like liquid death, rolling behind furniture and returning fire with precision that spoke of extensive training. His shots found their marks with devastating accuracy, and she heard screams from the terrace that confirmed at least one attacker would not be getting up again. "Kitchen," Lorenzo barked, grabbing her hand and pulling her through the villa as bullets chewed chunks from walls around them. They reached the kitchen as footsteps pounded up the back stairs, multiple men converging on their position with military coordination. Lorenzo positioned himself between her and the approaching threat, his weapon trained on the doorway with unwavering focus. The first man through the door died before he could raise his gun, Lorenzo's shot taking him center mass and dropping him instantly. The second hesitated for a fatal split second, giving Lorenzo time to put 2 rounds into his chest with mechanical precision. "Behind you," Zara shouted as a third attacker appeared at the window. Lorenzo spun and fired in one fluid motion, but not before the man got off a wild shot that shattered bottles on the counter beside them. Zara felt glass fragments cut her cheek, felt blood trickle down her skin, but her hands remained steady on her own weapon. More footsteps echoed from multiple directions, suggesting the attackers had split up to surround the villa. They were trapped, outnumbered, with limited ammunition against professional killers who wanted her dead. "The boat," Lorenzo said grimly. "We need to reach the boat." Their escape route lay across 50 yards of open terrace, exposed to anyone with a clear line of sight from the gardens. It might as well have been a mile for all the protection it offered. "On my signal, run for the dock. Do not look back, do not stop, do not try to help me if I go down." "I am not leaving you," Zara said fiercely. "Zara, I said I am not leaving you. We go together or not at all." Lorenzo's expression shifted, something like wonder mixing with the deadly focus as he looked at her blood-streaked face and determined eyes. This was not the terrified woman who had hidden in an alley watching violence unfold. This was his wife, his partner, someone willing to fight beside him rather than run to safety. "Together then," he said softly. "On 3. They burst from the kitchen in perfect synchronization, Lorenzo laying down covering fire while she ran low and fast across the terrace. Bullets sparked off stone around them, one coming close enough to tug at her hair, but they reached the boat dock with both of them still breathing. The speedboat was sleek and powerful, built for quick escapes rather than luxury. Lorenzo had the engine roaring to life while Zara cast off lines, both of them working with desperate efficiency as muzzle flashes erupted from the villa behind them. As they pulled away from the dock, she saw one of the attackers emerge from cover with what looked like a rocket launcher. Her blood turned to ice as she realized what he intended. "Lorenzo," she screamed, pointing toward shore. He saw the threat and threw the boat into a sharp turn that nearly sent them both overboard, the rocket streaking past to explode harmlessly in their wake. Water and debris rained down around them as Lorenzo pushed the engine to its limits, racing for the open sea and whatever sanctuary they could find. The safe house was a fishing cabin hidden in a secluded cove, stocked with supplies and weapons for exactly this kind of emergency. By the time they reached it, dawn was breaking over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful after the violence they had fled. Lorenzo killed the engine and slumped forward, adrenaline finally fading to reveal the toll the firefight had taken. Blood darkened his white shirt from a wound she had not seen him take, and his hands shook slightly as he tried to tie off the boat. "You are hurt," she said, her training as a nurse overriding everything else as she moved to examine the injury. "Just a graze," he protested, though the amount of blood suggested otherwise. "Let me see." The bullet had torn through the muscle of his left shoulder, missing anything vital but creating a wound that needed immediate attention. She helped him into the cabin, grateful for the medical supplies someone had thoughtfully stocked, and set about cleaning and bandaging the injury with professional efficiency. You saved my life, Lorenzo said quietly as she worked. When you spotted the rocket launcher, when you refused to leave me behind, you could have been killed. So could you, she replied, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they had just survived. And I meant what I said. We face this together or not at all. He caught her hand as she finished securing the bandage, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I have spent 15 years maintaining a facade, he said softly, pretending to be someone I was not, keeping everyone at a distance to protect them from my world. I have been so lonely, Zara. So tired of being alone with the weight of everything I carry. You are not alone anymore, she whispered, leaning down to rest her forehead against his. Are you not afraid of what you saw back there? The violence, the killing? She was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had happened. She had watched her husband kill 3 men without hesitation, had seen him move through combat like violence was as natural as breathing. It should have terrified her. Instead, all she felt was gratitude that he was skilled enough to keep them both alive. I am afraid of losing you, she said finally. I am afraid of them succeeding in their mission to silence me. But I am not afraid of who you are or what you do to protect us. Even knowing what my world contains. Especially knowing. I have seen you gentle and tender and completely focused on my pleasure. I have also seen you deadly and efficient when our lives depended on it. I love all of who you are, Lorenzo. Not just the parts that feel safe. Relief flooded his expression, followed by something that looked like disbelief that she could accept him so completely. We could run, he said quietly. Take new identities, disappear to somewhere they would never find us. You could have a normal life, away from all of this. Is that what you want? Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the peaceful cove that hid them from their enemies. No, he said finally. I want to go home. I want to live openly with my wife, without hiding behind facades or running from threats. I want to build the life we started in Sicily and protect it from anyone who tries to take it away. Then that is what we will do, Zara said firmly. We go back, we face this, and we end it permanently. 3 days later, they returned to the city with a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. Instead of hiding from the men hunting her, they would draw them into the open where Lorenzo's superior resources and local knowledge would give them the advantage. It meant using herself as bait, putting her life at risk to end the threat once and for all. The meeting was set for midnight at the same warehouse where Antonio had been attacked, the symbolism intentional. Lorenzo would appear to be delivering her to them in exchange for guaranteed safety, a deception that required her to trust completely in his ability to turn the tables when the moment came. She wore a wire that would capture confessions of their crimes, evidence that could be used to justify what Lorenzo planned to do to them. When they took the bait and revealed themselves, convinced they had won, Marco and Lorenzo's other associates would surround the building while Lorenzo himself eliminated the primary threats. You do not have to do this, Lorenzo told her as they prepared for what might be their last night together. We could still run. Running would not end it, Zara replied. They would keep hunting until they found us, and I refused to spend our marriage looking over our shoulders. The warehouse district was dark and quiet when they arrived, shadows and empty buildings providing perfect cover for an ambush. Lorenzo's men were already in position, invisible but ready, while she and Lorenzo approached the meeting point with carefully rehearsed vulnerability. The leader of their attackers was a thin man with cold eyes who looked disappointed that his prey had finally been delivered. With him were 2 associates, both armed and watchful, all of them convinced they had finally cornered the witness who could destroy their operation. Mrs. Castellano, the leader said with false politeness. You have caused us considerable trouble. I never meant to see anything, Zara replied, her voice shaking with what appeared to be fear. I just want this to be over. It will be, he assured her. Very soon. The conversation continued, capturing confessions and details that would justify everything that followed. When the leader finally revealed that they planned to kill both her and Lorenzo to eliminate all witnesses, she felt cold satisfaction that they had sealed their own fate. Lorenzo's signal was subtle, just a slight shift in his stance that she might have missed if they had not practiced it. Everything that followed happened with brutal efficiency. His first shot dropped the leader before the man could draw his weapon. His second and third eliminated the associates with surgical precision. The backup team that rushed from cover found themselves facing Marco and 6 other men who had been waiting in perfect ambush positions. The firefight was brief and decisive, ending with all threats neutralized and no casualties among Lorenzo's forces. In the aftermath, as police sirens wailed in the distance and statements were given to authorities who had been carefully briefed on the situation, Zara found herself sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance while a paramedic cleaned the cuts on her face from flying glass. Lorenzo sat beside her, his own injuries from their Sicily escape being tended by another medic, both of them bloodied but alive and finally, permanently safe. The men who had hunted her were dead or in custody, their organization dismantled, their threat eliminated forever. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "It is over," Lorenzo confirmed, reaching for her hand with fingers that were steady despite everything they had endured. "We are free to build whatever life we want together." Looking at him in the harsh lights of the emergency vehicles, seeing the devotion in his eyes despite the violence they had shared, Zara felt something settle in her chest. This was her husband, her partner, her protector and lover and equal. Together they had faced death and chosen each other over safety, love over fear. "Take me home," she whispered against his lips. "Take me home and make love to me like we might live forever." His smile was brilliant as he helped her down from the ambulance, his arm wrapping around her waist with possessive tenderness. "Forever," he agreed. "That is exactly what we have now." The return to Lorenzo's estate felt like stepping into a completely different life. The same marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the same artwork graced the walls, the same ocean view stretched endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. But everything had changed because she had changed, because they had changed together through fire and blood and the kind of love that transforms people at the cellular level. Rosa met them at the front door, her experienced eyes taking in their bandaged injuries and the way Lorenzo's arm wrapped protectively around Zara's waist. There was something knowing in the older woman's smile, a satisfaction that suggested she had been waiting for this moment far longer than Zara had realized. "Welcome home, Mrs. Castellano," Rosa said warmly. "Both of you." The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. This was not the careful courtesy she had shown before, when Zara was still an outsider pretending to be something she was not. This was genuine welcome for the woman who had claimed her place as Lorenzo's true wife. Over the following days, the transformation in household dynamics became impossible to ignore. The staff no longer treated her with the polite distance reserved for temporary arrangements. They brought her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked, consulted her about meals and household schedules, deferred to her opinions with the same respect they showed Lorenzo. It was as if a switch had been flipped, revealing that they had been waiting for permission to acknowledge what they had suspected all along. The most dramatic change came 3 days after their return, when Lorenzo's business associates arrived for their weekly meeting. Zara was reading in the library when voices in the foyer announced their arrival, the same men who had treated her with puzzling deference during their marriage of convenience. This time, however, Lorenzo did not simply introduce her and send her away. Instead, he appeared in the library doorway with his hand extended, his smile warm with genuine affection rather than careful politeness. "Come, my love," he said, the endearment rolling off his tongue with natural ease. "I want you to meet my partners properly." What followed was perhaps the most surreal conversation of her life. The men who had previously treated her like an honored guest now looked at her with something approaching awe, their deference shifting from polite to genuinely respectful. Anthony Torino actually removed his hat when Lorenzo wrapped his arm around her waist, the gesture old-world courtly in its formality. "Mrs. Castellano," Torino said gravely, "we owe you an apology. We have been participating in a deception that was necessary for Lorenzo's safety, but which required us to treat you with less than complete honesty." "I do not understand," Zara said, though she was beginning to suspect she did. "We have known for years that Lorenzo was not actually gay," Torino explained with a slight smile. "The pretense was useful for business reasons, protection from certain expectations and pressures. But we also knew that when he finally chose a wife, she would have to be someone extraordinary to make him abandon such a useful facade." "And you believed I was that person?" "We knew you were that person," another associate interjected, his smile warm with approval. "The way he looked at you, the way he moved around you, the care he took with your comfort and safety. We have never seen Lorenzo so completely focused on another person's well-being. Lorenzo's arm tightened around her waist, possessive and proud in equal measure. She makes me want to be honest about who I am, he said simply. She makes authenticity worth the risk. After they left, Zara found herself alone with Lorenzo in his study, processing everything she had learned. The scope of the deception had been broader than she realized, involving not just Marco but an entire network of business associates who had participated in maintaining his cover for years. How many people knew the truth? She asked. About my sexuality? Everyone who mattered. About how I felt about you. That was harder to hide than I expected. She studied his face, noting the relaxed set of his shoulders, the easy warmth in his expression. This was Lorenzo without his guard up, without the careful control that had characterized their early interactions. The transformation was remarkable. You seem different, she observed. More relaxed. I have spent 15 years measuring every word, every gesture, every public appearance to maintain a facade that kept me safe but alone. Do you have any idea what it feels like to finally be able to touch my wife in public, to introduce her as the woman I love rather than a convenient arrangement? Show me, she whispered. That afternoon, they visited the family restaurant where their story had begun. Antonio welcomed them with tears of joy, his face still bearing faint scars from the beating that had started everything. When Lorenzo pulled out Zara's chair and kissed her forehead with tender affection, the entire staff stopped what they were doing to witness the moment. This is my wife, Lorenzo announced to the room, his voice carrying the kind of quiet pride that made her heart flutter. The woman I love more than my own life. The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt, coming from people who had known Lorenzo for years and had never seen him show public affection for anyone. Several of the older waitresses actually wept, their faces bright with happiness for the man they clearly adored. Marco appeared during dessert, his smile brilliant as he took in the sight of them sitting close together, Lorenzo's hand resting possessively on her thigh while she leaned into his warmth with unconscious ease. You two look disgustingly happy, Marco said with fond amusement as he joined them at their table. We are, Lorenzo replied without apology. And you can stop pretending to be my lover now. Permanently. Thank God, Marco laughed. Do you know how exhausting it has been to deflect the advances of beautiful women who thought I was unavailable? Sophia has been threatening to dump me if I did not come clean soon. Sophia turned out to be a stunning brunette who appeared moments later, sliding into the booth beside Marco with the kind of comfortable affection that spoke of a long and loving relationship. She greeted Zara with warm enthusiasm, her English accented with what sounded like native Italian. I have been dying to meet you properly, Sophia said, her eyes dancing with mischief. Marco has told me everything about your wedding, about how Lorenzo could barely keep his hands off you during the ceremony. We were taking bets on how long the pretense would last. You were all in on this? Zara asked, looking around the table at their smiling faces. Not in on it, Sophia clarified, just watching with great amusement as Lorenzo tried to hide his complete infatuation with his new wife. It was quite entertaining. 2 weeks later, Lorenzo surprised her with an announcement that made her heart skip several beats. We are going to have a real wedding, he said over breakfast, his tone suggesting this was already decided rather than a proposal. With both our families, proper vows, and a celebration that reflects what we actually mean to each other. We are already married, she protested weakly, though the idea filled her with warm excitement. We had a ceremony of protection and convenience, Lorenzo corrected. I want to marry you again, properly this time, as the woman I love rather than the woman I am trying to save. The second ceremony took place in the same cathedral, but everything else was completely different. This time, Zara walked down the aisle in a dress she had chosen herself, custom designed to make her feel like a princess. This time, Lorenzo's eyes never left her face as she approached, his expression naked with love and desire and wonder that she was choosing him freely. His mother wept openly in the front pew, this time from joy rather than confusion. Her own mother had flown in from Louisiana, somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur, but clearly delighted that her daughter had found such obvious happiness. The church was filled with friends and family who understood exactly what they were witnessing, the celebration of two people who had found authentic love in the most unexpected circumstances. When Father Miguel asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Their responses were firm with conviction rather than careful with pretense. "I do," Zara said, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. "I choose you, Lorenzo Castellano, exactly as you are. Dangerous, protective, passionate, and mine." "I do," Lorenzo replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I choose you, Zara Williams Castellano, brave and beautiful and perfect. My partner, my equal, my heart." This time, when Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed was anything but ceremonial. Lorenzo kissed her with such passion and devotion that the congregation erupted in spontaneous applause, his hands tangling in her hair as he claimed her mouth with thorough possession. "Forever," he whispered against her lips, loud enough for the front pews to hear. "You are mine forever." The honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast was everything their truncated stay in Sicily should have been. 2 weeks of Mediterranean sunshine, incredible food, and the kind of passionate intimacy that comes from complete emotional and physical connection. They made love on silk sheets with ocean breezes drifting through open windows, talked for hours about their dreams and fears and plans for the future, and learned each other's bodies with the thorough attention of people who had all the time in the world. Lorenzo was insatiable in his desire for her, as if he was making up for all the months of restraint and careful distance. He worshipped her body with hands and mouth and whispered endearments, bringing her pleasure with skillful intensity before claiming his own satisfaction with passionate abandon. They made love on the terrace under the stars, in the infinity pool with the sun warming their skin, in the shower with water cascading around them like silver silk. But it was not just physical connection that deepened between them. They talked about everything: his childhood in Sicily, her dreams of completing nursing school, his plans for expanding legitimate business interests, her desire to work with trauma victims. They planned their future together with the careful attention of people building something meant to last forever. When they returned home, it was to news that transformed both their lives in ways they had not expected. Lorenzo's legitimate businesses were thriving, partly because he no longer had to carefully manage public perceptions of his availability. Associates who had previously treated him as a useful but emotionally unavailable ally now sought genuine partnerships, drawn by his obvious contentment and the stability his marriage represented. More surprisingly, several business opportunities had emerged specifically because of Zara's presence in his life. Her background in healthcare had caught the attention of investors interested in medical facilities, while her natural warmth and intelligence made her an asset in social situations where spouses were expected to participate meaningfully in conversations. "You are good for business," Lorenzo told her after a particularly successful dinner meeting where her insights about patient care had impressed potential partners. "They see me as more trustworthy now, more stable, because they see how much I love you." "Is that the only reason you married me?" she teased. "For business advantages?" "Absolutely," he replied with mock seriousness, backing her against the kitchen counter with predatory intent. "I married you purely for strategic purposes. Your intelligence, your beauty, your incredible body, your brave heart, the way you make me laugh, the way you feel in my arms when we make love. All completely strategic." She was laughing as he kissed her neck, his hands finding the hem of her dress with practiced efficiency. Even after months of marriage, their desire for each other showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it seemed to intensify as they learned new ways to pleasure each other, new depths of intimacy to explore. 6 months after their second wedding, Zara woke one morning with a familiar feeling of nausea that sent excitement racing through her system. The pregnancy test confirmed what she had already begun to suspect, and she spent the rest of the day planning how to tell Lorenzo he was going to be a father. She found him in his study that evening, reviewing contracts with the kind of focused attention that had always impressed her. When she appeared in the doorway wearing nothing but one of his shirts and a secretive smile, his attention immediately shifted to something far more interesting than business documents. "You are distracting me," he said, pushing back from his desk with obvious appreciation for the view she presented. "Good," she replied, moving to perch on the edge of his desk within easy reach. "I have something important to tell you. More important than how incredible you look in my shirt? Much more important." She handed him a small wrapped box, watching his expression shift from amused desire to curious attention as he accepted the gift. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny pair of baby shoes in soft yellow leather. Lorenzo went very still, his eyes moving from the shoes to her face and back again. When understanding dawned, his expression transformed into something so radiant it took her breath away. "Are you telling me what I think you are telling me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am telling you that in about 7 months, you are going to be a father." He was on his feet in an instant, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around the study with joyous abandon. When he set her down, his hands immediately went to her still flat stomach, his touch reverent as he processed the miracle growing inside her. "Our baby," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "We made a baby." "We did," she confirmed, covering his hands with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lorenzo said, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have given me everything I never dared to hope for. Love, partnership, authenticity, and now this. A family of our own." That night, he made love to her with exquisite tenderness, his hands and mouth worshiping her body with reverent care for the new life growing within her. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion, he spoke softly about his dreams for their child, his hopes for the kind of family they would build together. 2 years later, Zara sat in the same cathedral where they had married twice, watching their daughter Isabella take her first tentative steps down the aisle as flower girl for Marco and Sophia's wedding. At 18 months, Isabella was a perfect blend of both parents, with Lorenzo's green eyes and dark hair combined with Zara's warm smile and fearless spirit. Lorenzo sat beside her in the pew, their son Antonio sleeping peacefully in his arms, while Isabella scattered rose petals with intense concentration. At 6 months, Antonio was already showing signs of inheriting his father's strong will and his mother's calm disposition, a combination that promised interesting years ahead. "She is going to be trouble," Lorenzo murmured, watching Isabella charm the congregation with her serious approach to her flower girl duties. "She gets that from you," Zara replied, leaning against his shoulder with contented happiness. "I have never caused trouble in my life," Lorenzo protested with mock indignation. "You caused trouble for me from the moment I met you," she said softly. "The best kind of trouble." After the ceremony, they gathered at Lorenzo's estate for the reception, the same gardens where she had first questioned Marco about the truth, now filled with friends and family celebrating authentic love. Isabella ran between the tables with the kind of fearless joy that made Zara's heart ache with happiness, while Antonio charmed guests from his father's arms with gummy smiles and grabbing hands. During dinner, as speeches were made and toasts raised, Zara found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From that terrifying night in the alley to this celebration of love and family, everything had changed in ways she never could have imagined. "Mama," Isabella said, climbing onto her lap with the determination that characterized everything she did. "Why does Papa always look at you like that?" "Like what, baby?" "Like he wants to eat you up." Laughter rippled through nearby tables as Lorenzo's face flushed with embarrassment. But when he looked at her, Zara could see exactly what Isabella meant. Even after years of marriage, Lorenzo still looked at her with the same intensity that had first confused and then thrilled her. "Because Papa loves Mama very much," Zara explained, smoothing Isabella's dark hair. "And sometimes when people love each other that much, it shows in their faces." "Will someone look at me like that someday?" Isabella asked with the serious curiosity of a toddler. "If you are very lucky and very brave and very true to yourself," Zara said, glancing at Lorenzo, who was watching this conversation with soft eyes. "Someone will love you exactly as you are, and you will never have to pretend to be anyone else." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep in their beds, Zara and Lorenzo walked hand in hand through the gardens where their love had first begun to bloom. The moon hung full and bright over the Mediterranean, casting silver light across paths they had walked as strangers, as reluctant spouses, as passionate lovers, and finally as devoted parents. "Do you ever miss it?" Zara asked as they settled onto the bench where Marco had first told her the truth about Lorenzo's sexuality. "The simplicity of believing you were gay and I was safe?" "Never," Lorenzo said without hesitation, pulling her close against his side. "I spent too many years hiding who I was, what I wanted, what I felt. Being able to love you openly, to show the world how much you mean to me, to build a real family with you. It is worth every risk, every complication, every moment of danger we faced, even knowing what it cost us. It cost us nothing that mattered and gave us everything worth having. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of waves against cliffs and the distant laughter of night staff cleaning up after the reception. This was their life now, Zara reflected. Authentic, complicated, passionate, and completely real. No more facades, no more pretending, no more hiding behind careful lies designed to keep the world at arm's length. Their children would grow up knowing their parents as people who loved deeply and honestly, who had fought for each other and won. Isabella would learn that real love means accepting someone completely, while Antonio would understand that strength comes from vulnerability rather than control. Lorenzo, she said softly. Yes, my love. Do you think our story could inspire other people to stop hiding behind what feels safe and choose authenticity instead? To risk everything for real love rather than settling for comfortable lies? Lorenzo considered this, his hand stroking gently through her hair as he thought about all the people they knew who lived behind carefully constructed facades. I think, he said slowly, that anyone who has ever been afraid to show their true self, anyone who has ever chosen safety over authenticity, anyone who has ever wondered if real love is worth the risk, might find something valuable in what we discovered together. And what did we discover? That pretending to be someone you are not is the loneliest existence imaginable. That real love requires complete honesty, even when it feels dangerous. That the person who loves you for exactly who you are is worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of terror you face to claim that happiness. Zara leaned into his warmth, thinking about the woman she had been when this journey started. Afraid, hiding, settling for safety instead of reaching for what she really wanted. She had thought marrying a gay man was the perfect solution to all her problems, never imagining that what she really needed was to fall in love with a dangerous man who would see past all her defenses to the brave, passionate woman hidden beneath. Take me inside, she whispered against his neck. Make love to your wife like you never have to pretend again. Never again, Lorenzo agreed, rising and pulling her up with him. No more pretending, no more hiding, no more lies. Just us, exactly as we are, for the rest of our lives. As they walked back toward the house where their children slept safely in beds that would never know the fear that had once defined their parents' lives, Zara felt the deep satisfaction of a story that had found its perfect ending. Not because the danger was over or the problems were solved, but because two people had chosen to face everything together with complete honesty and authentic love. Behind them, the Mediterranean whispered against ancient cliffs, keeping secrets that no longer needed to be kept, while ahead of them, their future stretched bright with possibilities built on the strongest foundation of all: truth, trust, and the kind of love that makes pretending impossible. This was what it meant to live without facades, to love without reservation, to build a life on the bedrock of complete authenticity. This was what it meant to be truly married, in every sense that mattered. This was what it meant to be home.